Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Ready for a mind bender? What if the world doesn't just sit there being observed, but actually observes us right back? Today we're taking a deep dive into You, a philosophical work by Michel Serres. It's all about perception and observation, but not in the way you might expect. We're talking hidden depths, secret languages. It's wild. Okay, so Serres describes this incredible cave filled with these glowing, almost gem-like stalactites, creating this cathedral of light and shadow. And as captivated as he is by the beauty of it all, he also gets this feeling like the cave itself is somehow aware of him, watching him back as he explores. I don't know about you, but it gave me chills just reading it. So, is this just some poetic flourishes, or could there be something more to this whole idea of the world observing us? I mean, really.
It's really something, isn't it? And I don't think Serres is just being poetic here. He's actually tapping into a much deeper idea that observation, it's not this one-way street. We might observe the world, sure, but in a way, every interaction, even on a cosmic level, can be seen as a form of observation in return.
Okay, whoa. You're blowing my mind a little. So, it's not just me staring really hard at a security camera, but that camera is also, in a way, observing me back.
Yeah, exactly. Just think about how, light has to bounce off objects, right? For us to even see them. And that reflection itself, that's a kind of interaction. It's like a form of observation in itself. Or what about when a website tracks your browsing history through those pesky cookies? It's gathering information about you, building a whole profile based on what you do online.
Okay, yeah. That is kind of creepy. I never thought of it that way. But also kind of interesting, right?
Right. I mean, it really makes you rethink the whole thing about our place in the universe and all. We like to think we are these all-seeing beings just looking out at everything, but we're not passive observers at all. We are active participants in this, constant exchange of information, a constant flow.
It's a two-way street, not a one-way mirror. I like that. So, to kind of dig into that a bit more about observation and knowledge, Serres uses this really interesting analogy. He compares human thought to the night sky. He says both are filled with stars, but instead of giant balls of burning gas, our minds are filled with, ideas, observations, those aha moments. So what do you think he's getting at with that?
I think it's a really clever way to get us thinking about knowledge, about how we know things. Serres is pushing back against this very old idea that truth is this single fixed thing, kind of like the sun, shining down on us. But for him, truth is much more faceted, always changing, much more like constellations, which seem to shift and change depending on when and where we are when we look at them. And so what we see as true, right now, is always influenced by our perspective, what we know so far. Just like how much of the night sky we can actually see is limited by light pollution or even how good our telescopes are.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like that saying, right?
Oh.
What you see depends on where you stand.
Oh.
Literally. But our perspective shapes everything, doesn't it? I've had moments where I learned one new thing, one fact, and it completely changed how I saw this whole event that happened. Like suddenly looking at the same constellation, but in a totally different light.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly why Serres doesn't want us to get so caught up in finding one big truth with a capital T. Instead, he wants us to think of knowledge more as this process of gathering all these points of light, those individual ideas, observations, even those random experiences, and then connecting them to form our own kind of unique constellations of understanding.
So instead of searching for this one right answer, we should be trying to connect all those little dots of insight.
Yes, exactly. It's the connections that matter, the patterns that we find in what might seem like random pieces of information we encounter.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it can't all be dazzling constellations and light bulb moments, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the world is full of what seem like pretty insignificant events, too. And Serres doesn't shy away from those. He actually talks about this, kind of mundane event. This guy on a dredging machine pulling a tiny pebble out of the Garonne River. It's just this little pebble observed for a second before it's crushed into gravel. Makes you think, what's the point of being seen at all if you're just going to be, ground into dust? Does he have an answer for that?
It is kind of sad, isn't it? This tiny little pebble just minding its own business down in the riverbed, then suddenly plucked up, only to be, instantly crushed.
Yeah.
It does make you wonder, what's the point of being noticed at all, even for a second, if that's all you get, right?
I know. You almost want to imagine it had some kind of pebble consciousness.
Yeah.
And it was like, hey, I was here.
Mm-hmm.
But does Serres think that brief moment of observation actually matters?
I think he's getting at that, yeah. He kind of plays with this idea that even those fleeting moments, those little observations, they all add to this huge, like, network of information in the universe, you know? Every interaction, even just a glance, it leaves this trace, a tiny ripple in everything that is.
Okay, so it's like that butterfly effect thing.
Yeah.
Something small can have huge consequences we don't even realize.
Yeah, exactly. And this idea about everything being connected, information spreading out like ripples, it's even more relevant now, right? With this digital world we live in. Think about how our digital footprints go everywhere. It's kind of scary if you think about it too much.
Speaking of footprints, Serres takes us from this riverbed to a totally different scene. He's in a jeweler's shop surrounded by all these sparkling gemstones, each one catching the light in a different way. And he has this, this epiphany almost. He realizes that even these things, these objects, they're storing and transmitting information too, just like us. How does he get there? Because it seems like a bit of a jump, right?
It does at first, doesn't it? But the way he connects it is by looking at how we've always stored and passed on information, right? From cave paintings to like books to the way we even build our cities. And now, well, we've got the whole digital thing on top of it all. Think about it. Your phone, your laptop, the cloud, information overload.
Right. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And that's kind of Serres' point here. These objects, technology, it's becoming more and more communicative all the time. Makes you wonder where the line is between what's alive and what isn't, you know? Because they're part of this whole web of information exchange too, just like the pebble in the river, just like those constellations we were talking about.
So we're all connected. Humans, objects, nature. It's a lot, isn't it? Yeah. Makes you want to just say, yep, everything's connected and be done with it. But where do we fit into it all? It can feel overwhelming.
That's where this concept of biogeia comes in that Serres talks about. It's like this world where humans aren't at the center of everything. We're just one part of this huge web of life, all connected. And he uses this really cool example, Aboriginal art in Australia.
Oh, yeah. He talks about how that art is not stuck in some museum. It's part of the landscape itself.
Yeah.
Like the whole world is a living, breathing museum. Mm-hmm. You can find a story in every rock, every tree, every animal.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And this biogeia idea, it's like a challenge to us to stop seeing the world as all about us, you know, to recognize that everything, every part of the environment has its own value, its own importance.
It's like that feeling you get when you're really out in nature, like surrounded by it. Mm-hmm. And you realize, wow, even this little bit of water, this dirt, there's so much life, there's so much history.
Totally. And that feeling, that awe, that awareness of how connected we are to it all, to nature, that's what Serres wants us to get back to, because he thinks it's super important, especially for the future.
Wow, this has been something else. We started in a cave, then a riverbed, ended up in the Australian outback. Yeah. And all because we wanted to figure out this whole observation thing, right?
It's quite a journey, isn't it? Serres will do that to you. Take you all over the place, but in a good way.
For sure. So after this deep dive into you, with you, I think what really sticks with me is that the world is way more observant than we think. You know, it's not just us looking out at it. It's like this constant back and forth, this exchange, almost like everything's looking back at us in its own way.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And it really makes you ask if that's true. If we are being observed, even when we don't realize it, then how does that change how we observe? What's our responsibility in all of this?
See, that's what I love about Serres. He always leaves you with more to think about. It's like, okay, if the universe is listening, how does that change how we act, how we treat each other, technology, the planet?
It's huge when you really start to think about it. Because if our observations have an impact, if we're really part of this interconnected web, then we kind of have to start acting like it, right? With more respect, more awareness.
It's like we've been whispering secrets to the universe this whole time, thinking no one was listening, and now we're realizing maybe, just maybe, it was listening all along.
And maybe it's time we really listen back.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about. Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with me into you. I feel like I've got a whole new perspective on observation on both sides of it.
The pleasure was all mine. There's always something new to see, to learn, to observe, right?
That's the truth. And to everyone listening out there, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to look at the world in a new light. Don't be afraid to ask questions, keep exploring, and never forget the world might just be watching. Until next time, keep diving deep.